Hello, Gilbert.
Hi,
How are you?
good.
Welcome to the Nothing Conference.
Okay.
The
What's on the agenda?
agenda today is
Nothing.
we're going to be asking you some questions, and then we're going to open up the stage for some questions for some participants.
Okay.
And the first question that I have, Gilbert, is equality permeates this moment. You said it in your book. I love that quote from you. It is quite obvious, but can you further expand?
Just repeat the quote.
For sure. Equality permeates this moment. That this is a quote from you, and it's quite obvious, right? But can you further expand this amazing quote?
Well, equality means that everything is equal, and this moment is the immediacy, the livingness or life. And to divide that, you have to use concepts or ideas. So naturally, it's undivided as the immediacy, and it's not something that comes and goes. So we're so used to thinking in packages of things coming and going. They have a certain duration, day and night, whatever. And but the immediacy doesn't come and go, and the experiencing doesn't come and go. So experiences, so-called experiences, come and go. And they are really the intellect labeling these so-called experiences, and with a narrative or a subject-object context. And that's all seemingly dividing this immediacy into a kind of a duration or a progress or regress. So that it's all conceptual, but the immediacy, the actuality is totally clear and present, and that's your identity. You know, your identity is not something. It is indescribable. It's not, you can't compartmentalize it or put it in a jar and save it for later. And its quality is cognition. Cognition is the activity of knowing, which cannot be stored in memory. You can't store it in memory. It's always ever fresh and new. So, but memory's there. It's a useful thing, but we tend to refer to it more than we need.
Thank you for that answer, Gilbert. You also said that direct insight is a realization of the mind, not study. This is so spot on, but what is direct insight? Can it be attained?
Well, an insight is a seeming moment of seeing, clear seeing, or seeing into, insight, seeing into. So everything appears in the seeing. You know, you might be on a street corner or near a street corner and something appears around the corner. It comes into the seeing. Whatever that is, it comes into the seeing. It was already there, but you can't see around corners. So an insight is a moment, a seeming moment of temporal seeing. And direct insight means that there's cognition, then there's perception. Perception, we need to understand, you know, we use all these different words, and they're understood differently by different people. But the way that I use the word perception is that the intellect which have stored all sorts of labels for things, experiences and things in the world. That this apparent storage of labels and things instantly appears. You know, if you see an elephant, the word elephant is there, but that's the perceiving. The elephant appears in the seeing instantaneously. So a direct insight is not, it's unprocessed by the so-called intellect. So when we have a sort of I used to call it a cutting insight, because it seems to cut through everything that whatever the mind's occupied with, and it clears the cognition of stuff, and you have a direct insight into your own nature or into the nature of things or all things. So that's what a direct insight is in the terminology that I speak of. What was the other part of the question? There wasn't.
I have a first question, Gilbert, from an audience. May immediacy become a concept too?
Well, of course, everything can become a concept. Without concepts, how can you even think about it? But in its essence, it's not a concept. Unless if you want to say that God created everything and everything is God's concepts. But in just normal terms, you know, we have to use words, and words are very good for explaining ideas. Ideas are very good at explaining symbols. But when you understand the ideas, you don't need the words anymore. When you understand the symbols, you don't need the ideas anymore. So that's a seeming progress. But if you're going in the direction of discovering your true identity, it's an elimination. It's I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this, I'm not this. Whatever it is, I'm not. If you can perceive something, you're not it. But ultimately, one realizes that you are everything, but that's not immediately apparent.
Thank you, Gilbert. What is direct experience and what is experiencing what?
Well, direct experience is really experiencing. The ing means it's an activity happening presently. And experience is usually a series of concepts or labels that describe something that's happening to me. So it's referring to me, and it's a story. It becomes my story. But direct experiencing is well, a direct experience is experiencing, where there's no subject or object. That can sound pretty, you know, far-fetched without understanding. And that's what it's all about. It's all about coming to a clear understanding for yourself through your so-called own insights, not depending on somebody else, you know, somebody else to feed you insights, because they're actually worthless, more or less. You know, your insight that you have, it's of no use to me. You can try and share it with me, but there's no guarantee that I'm going to get any benefit from it. So it's all about coming to a clear understanding of what is, not what was, which is memory, or what will be, which is expectation or anticipation, but what is. And what is clear and obvious.
I have a question from an audience here named Shamash. Gilbert, can you share your story of discovering reality?
Oh my God. The story of discovering reality. Oh. Well, first of all, nobody discovers reality. And if they tell a story about them discovering reality, then they're bullshitting. Reality is, and it's that which never changes. So you don't discover it. It kind of discovers you in a way. But I think that what the person is really asking is, what's my story of how I came to an understanding? Yeah, well, we all have a story to tell, I guess. I think as a very young individual, I had a sense of there's something else going on that nobody's talking about. And then there were different experiences that at one point I had what I would call a direct experiencing of infinity at a very young age, 12 years old or something. But there's a sense of wonder and inexplicable joy, and it never really leaves you. It's always there, no matter what's happening. And it was there before you so-called discovered it. So it's the timeless nature of awareness, I think, that seemingly reveals itself in the circumstances of a so-called individual. And it appears that there's a tremendous game going on of hiding this from ourselves, or hiding it from the so-called seeker. And so it's a real challenge because one needs to be earnest and kind of sincere with yourself. That sounds dualistic, but yeah, it's anyway, the story goes, eventually I had lots and lots of experiences, and somebody gave me I Am That, Nisargadatta's book, I Am That. It was in 2 volumes, volume 1 and volume 2. And I was so struck by these books that I read them every day. I read pages every day for 4 years, and eventually went to India to try and find a trace of Nisargadatta. And I found that trace through Ramesh Balsekar, who had been his translator for several years before Nisargadatta died. And also I met Ranjit Maharaj. And after that, I came back to Australia, and while I was in India, I met another Australian who told me about a guy called Sailor Bob. And I said, Sailor Bob? What are we talking about? Cartoon characters or what? And because it was an odd sort of name. And he said, no, he went to see Nisargadatta, and he holds meetings in Melbourne, and he's very clear. And he said, I'll send you a tape of one of his meetings. So he did. He didn't return to Australia for 6 weeks or something, this guy, and eventually a tape turned up in the post. And I listened to this tape, and I was very struck by it, so much so that I actually started to transcribe everything on the tape. The audio quality on the tape was not good, and I was an audio engineer, so but I persisted, and I used my technology to clean the sound up and get down everything on paper, and I transcribed the whole meeting, and I actually made a little booklet from it, and I got Bob's phone number from this guy that sent me the tape. And I rang up Bob and I said, do you mind if I make a little booklet of one of your meetings? And I'd already done it, but I thought I'd better ask his permission. And he said, yeah, go ahead. And he later told me that he didn't expect me to actually do it. But I posted it off to him, and within a week or so, he had the booklet. And that was the beginnings of a book that I eventually did called What's Wrong with Right Now, Unless You Think About It, which is transcriptions from several meetings of Bob's. And it's an excellent book. Some very, very direct pointers, which can seem to go over your head very easily because they're so simple. But the fact is, the truth is simple. It's so simple. We get into all these complicated ways of dressing it up and manipulating it to get some benefit out of it or whatever, and present it as some wonderful thing that's going to save humanity or whatever. But it's all simple. It's very, very simple. The fact that you are, the fact of your own being is the basis. The cognition is happening spontaneously. The seeing is happening spontaneously. The hearing is happening spontaneously. Everything is happening spontaneously. Where do you come into the picture where you say, I'm going to do this, or I'm seeing this, or I'm hearing this? These are all concepts that we take on board. I don't know. I can go on if you want, but...
Thank you so much for that answer. Bob and Kat actually are in the audience. Say hi to Bob and Kat. Hi, Bob. Hi, Kat. This awesome question. It's from a person named Anonymous. Last name is Attendee. Why am I not enlightened yet?
Because you're not holy enough. Well, enlightenment is just it's just a trap, really. I think Buddha was the one that sort of coined the phrase enlightenment, and it becomes such a sort of a trap. There's lots of people around who promise you to, I've heard stories of people paying $1 million to go to a retreat with the guarantee of after 7 days they would be enlightened. Enlightenment means illuminated, it means light. It means that there's an illumination. You're seeing, the activity of seeing is happening. Everything is illuminated. What's not illuminated? Back in here, where you're seeing from, appears to be a dark space. But there's the true light of consciousness there. And you can actually see that if you go out at night and look into on a clear night, and you look at the Milky Way or into the stars, you can sense this luminous darkness. And it's the same luminous darkness that's in here, because it's one space which doesn't have a center and it doesn't have a circumference. It doesn't have a center. This self-center that we believe in is a fabricated conceptual construct, which causes so much trouble because it's believed in, but it's not. If you actually try and find it, you can't find it. Have a look, see for yourself, be absolutely sincere and genuine. See if you can find the self-center anywhere, and you'll find that you can't. All you find is ideas and concepts and things from memory and imagination. And basically, we need to understand the difference between cognition and imagination. Imagination is a wonderful tool. A lot of creativity comes out of it. But if you take the imaginary to be reality, then there's trouble. First of all, you argue with other people about what is reality, etc., etc., and on it goes. So, but to actually understand the difference between cognition, the activity of knowing, and imagination is very significant, and nobody can do it for you. There are lots of so-called teachers around who will help you elaborate this story and this search for enlightenment and keep you on the path. And really, you know, they're holding you to ransom, and they're nobody can teach what they don't know, and nobody can teach what cannot be known. Somebody else cannot know your true nature. You are the only one who can know your true nature. And the irony is that that one that you are is the one without a second, which is non-dual. That's the crux of non-duality. All these other so-called people, the Buddha and the teachers, they're all appearances in this consciousness. They're appearances. So, you know, it's a seeming journey back to this immediacy of naked cognition, which is formless. We identify ourselves with the body, and that leads to all sorts of problems. Or we identify with the mind, and that leads to problems. And one has to, as Nisargadatta called it, neti. Not this, not this, not this, not this. So you eliminate all of these conceptual attachments we have to things and people and whatever, desires and fears, and kind of seemingly return to the place where you never left.
Thank you for that answer. I have another question here from Ankita. Hi, you mentioned having personal insights and not insights from others. Could you elaborate more on the seeming separation between I and others? In this sense, seeing that we're all the same nothingness?
Wow. Can you repeat that again for me?
Okay. You mentioned having personal insights and not insights from others. Could you elaborate more on the seeming separation between I and others? In this sense, seeing that we are all the same nothingness. Thank you, Ankita.
Yeah, well, I don't think I used the word personal insights, but you know, somebody else's insight is not your insight. You may gain an insight through their insight, but it's not you. One has to have one's own insights, so to speak. That's nothing to do with the person. The person is persona. It's a construct. There is no such, you know, person is not reality. Person is an interface between an apparent inside and an outside. And so in essence, there's no difference between individuals. We're all made of the same stuff. You know, scientifically, you could say that we're all made of stardust, or the elements of the body are actually composed from the elements of the earth, which are recycled. You know, the elements in my body have probably been recycled through thousands of bodies, millions of bodies, animals and creatures and things. The air that I breathe is recycled. Everything is intermingled and interwoven in these elements and the livingness, the expression of life, which is ever fresh and new. And we get attached to it because I want it to go on. I don't want it to finish, you know. But we don't know. We don't really know. We don't know the beginning or the end. You know, when you take your last breath, you won't know about it. But it doesn't mean it's the end. You know, life, there is only life. And life and death, they exist together. You can't have life and no death, because life lives on life, and things are being recycled in the sense of materiality. But, you know, in essence, some call it the spirit. It's timeless. And, you know, I think most people have a sense of that. You know, you talk to old people, I'm old, but you talk to older people and they say, I don't really feel old. I still feel like I'm a 16-year-old, you know, because that essence doesn't age, you know. It's only when you look in the mirror, you go, oh, who is that? You know, where are all those lines coming from? With grey hair everywhere. What's going on? I was young yesterday. But, you know, this spirit, this living spirit, which is the word's misused a lot, I think, but the essence of life, we all share that. You know, we might have different coloured skin and different shaped bodies, but we're on the inside, you know, we're all very similar. You know, a surgeon that cuts people open and stuff, he finds the same sort of stuff in everybody, because we're all made of the same stuff. And you know, all this racism and nonsense that goes on, this judgment of others, is just madness. It's really madness, but that's the way it plays itself. The dramas of life. I might have diverted off the track there a little bit. What were we talking about?
I'm going to go to a question from Sally. Sally asked, are there stages of awakening or enlightenment? Example, after one recognizes their true boundless nature, that they are not a personal identity, are there any deepening insights after that?
Well, where would you measure it from? You know, the trouble with all of this stuff of setting up stages and levels of consciousness and everything is it's kind of, it's really nonsense, and it's a trap, you know, because where are you going to measure if there are levels of consciousness? What level are you on? Where are you going to measure it from? You can assume that you're on a higher level, or you can assume that you're on a lower level and you've got a long way to go. I remember the first time I spoke to a Buddhist when I was a young man, and about enlightenment, and I remember him saying, well, you know, it's going to take you 1,000 lifetimes to become enlightened. And I was astounded. So, how would you know? Who would know that? But anyway, stages of awakening. Well, are you unawake now? Are you unaware right now? Are you unaware? No, you're aware. As Bob says, what did you have to do to be aware? Nothing. It's already so. It's already so. And then we should recognize that, the significance of that. But no, what we do is we put stages of awakening on top of it, and then levels of consciousness to climb, and ladders to heaven, and we burden it all down with all these concepts and beliefs. And then we complain that we're not making good progress. You know, the progressive path is a total story perpetrated and propagated by those who get some benefit out of it, or those who do not know. Those who do not know will lead people down paths of diversion and, you know, we're all going to heaven, whatever.
I have another question here from Tim. When teachers say everything is consciousness, what does this mean?
Well, it's you can't argue with it, can you? But the thing is, nobody can define what consciousness is. You know, there have been a lot of brilliant people around for hundreds of years, and we've got books going back centuries. Very bright people who've been working on some of these questions about consciousness and whatever. Nobody has ever been able to define consciousness, because the description or the definition is like a map. It's not the territory. The word is not the thing. You can't eat the word apple. Yeah. Did I answer the question?
Yes, thank you. Americ has a question. How can we help the energetic shell of the apparent individual to break?
What? Say that again?
How can we help the energetic shell of the apparent individual?
The energetic self or cell?
Shell. How can we help the energetic shell of the apparent individual to break?
Ah, right. Okay. Understand. The bubble. Well, you can't do anything. You know, the bubble that you think you're in may burst or may not burst. You can't really do anything about it. But if there are insights, if there's an investigation, if you make a sincere investigation into your beliefs, whatever they are, if you investigate your beliefs and you eliminate your beliefs, that seeming bubble of separation will get thinner and thinner and eventually just vanish. You can't predict when that might happen. And it's a story, you know. You are awake. There's no great awakening that you have to have. There's stories that just cloud the mind with impossible dreams. Start from the fact that you are awake. Right now, you are awake. And if there is this separation, this sense of being in a bubble, investigate those concepts and ideas that seemingly separate you from the whole or from others, and, you know, use the mind. Instead of letting the mind use you, use the mind. It's a tool to be used. Investigate anything that supports this idea that I'm separate, because that's the vulnerability, you know, that's the suffering, that's the psychological suffering that is really unnecessary. You know, that's a statement that I often make, is psychological suffering is unnecessary. Now, some people argue with that, and I think, what are you arguing for? Why are you supporting this psychological suffering? It's unnecessary, but it requires an investigation, and nobody can do it for us. We have to do it ourselves. You know, you can be with a guru or a teacher for 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, or a whole lifetime. But if you don't do the investigation for yourself and see for yourself, then what's it all about? Is it just codependence? Is that what we want? We want to just be with this teacher or a guru as a codependent, let them be enlightened, I'll just be the one who's trying to be enlightened. No, that's not good enough.
Thank you for that. Michael Smith has a question. Does the awareness of presence deepen over time? Have you experienced that?
Does the awareness of presence extend over time? Is that the question?
Deepen over.
Deepen.
Does the awareness of presence, deepen over time? Have you experienced that?
Yeah, all these concepts about deeper. You got to go deeper, man. You know, this is a conceptual construct of there's something deeper that we have to dig down and find, but it's a trap. And, you know, you're here now, investigate whatever it is that seemingly tries to take you away from this clarity of being. So you might be hanging on to all sorts of beliefs and stories you've been told. Investigate them. Are they true? Are they really true? You know, what else are you going to do with your time? You know, why not make the investigation? You know, if you truly want to go beyond this limited life of psychological suffering and woe is me and telling your sad story to everybody you come across, if you truly want to go beyond that, make the investigation. It's totally within your capacity to sit quietly with yourself and seriously look at what are you hanging on to? What benefit are you getting from all of these beliefs, these spiritual beliefs and the progressive path and I'm almost getting there and all the rest of it? You know, toss it out. Right here, right now is the life, is the immediacy. It's all clear and obvious. What is it that's getting in the way? It's belief in things that do not exist. So see that they don't exist. Eliminate them, and then what's left? It leaves you present and aware with nowhere to go, nothing to get, no one to, you know, worship or bow down to. You know, you are the consciousness. You are that one without a second.
Thank you. I have another question here, Gilbert. How to know the difference between knowing and imagination, from anonymous attendee?
Okay. Well, knowing is an activity. You know that you are. You know, somebody can come along and say, you don't exist. That's bullshit. You know that you are. That's the fundamental principle of existence. You know, we say the words I am. Now, it's very significant. The structure of that a very short sentence, I am. Am is the verb to be. I comes before am. I is the witness of the beingness. I am. First things first, I, which is identity. You can't say what your identity is. You don't know what your identity is unless you realize yourself as the whole. But I am. I am the witness of this beingness. that witness is a temporal reference point, which is ever fresh and ever new. Everything is registering upon the awareness or the consciousness or whatever before it's translated by the intellect. And so just realize that that witness is a reference point. It's an idea if you think about it, but if you don't think about it, there's witnessing happening without the idea of I. And that's the seeming tipping point. When you recognize that there is actually no I, no thing, where are you seeing from? Where is the seeing taking place? You can't pinpoint it. It has no center or circumference. The seeing is actually everywhere and nowhere. I could go on, but
here's another one from Gurav. Gurav asks, is there anything like a dark night of the soul, and how to get out of it?
Yeah, the famous dark night of the soul. Lots of very well-known stories about the dark night of the soul. So, well, this life is a seeming comedy, a parody, a tragedy, depending on your point of reference and your story and where you're identified with it. Yeah, so it's all a point. What is a point of view anyway? What is your point of view? This is a significant thing to investigate. A point of view is a temporal thing. It's I'm moving around. My point of view is moving around. But where is the point? The point is possibly an assumed identity called me, who's trying to control things or trying to get away from things or trying to get things. Yeah, I mean, it just opens this whole thing. I mean, where do you go? It's not about adding things. It's about eliminating. Come back to right here, right now. Pause a thought. You can pause a thought and just see. There's a clarity there. There's a sense of emptiness there. There's a sense of maybe freedom there. Or a fear. A fear may come up. But if I let go of who I think I am, what will I be? Well, why don't you find out? Well, I mean, nothing bad is going to happen to you if you discover your true nature. How could it be bad? It's not a bad thing. It's all of these things that we hang on to that terrorize us and make life a misery. You go into a cafe, not so much now because you're not allowed to go into cafes, but you listen to people talking and it's all misery. She said this to me and I said that and they did this and then I did that. This is all, regurgitating the same crap, And the thing is that it's entertainment. You can hear that they're very interested in these stories. It's like gossip is amazing. It travels so fast. You better gossip and everyone in town knows within 10 minutes. But you talk about the truth and it's like, nah, we don't need that shit. Not that you can talk about truth. I don't know if I answered the question or not.
Here's a question from Ben. It's a long one. Are you ready?
A long one.
Are you ready, Gilbert? A long question. I'm constantly questioning my me and investigating the ideas around I am very sincerely. There are certain things I need to think about and desire. If I give up my desire for a good life and career and stop thinking, how can I live and function in the world? Maharaj said you would still live a full life obsessed and continue your worldly life. I feel it is useful to long for good in which is a foundation for the search. So I guess the question is, um, did you get that? Want me to read it again?
No, I got the gist of it.
You got the gist of it. Good, good.
Yeah. Just read the first couple of lines again.
All right, just a second. Disappeared. I'm constantly questioning the me and investigating the ideas around I am very sincerely. There are certain things I need to think about and desire. Got it?
Okay. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, so that's a story. I'm constantly questioning the me. Who's questioning the me? That's the question. Who's really doing the investigation? And am I willing to put the word sincere on it? You know, it's very easy to delude oneself. And some people, I'm not pointing any fingers, I'm not saying the person who asked the question is like this, but one of the problems is that we develop this self-image, a spiritual self-image, who's very sincere and blah, 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 blah. And it's all bullshit. It's complete fabrication, but seemingly very hard to recognize or cut through, because there's so much investment in, you know, especially for somebody who's been on the path for 10 or 20 years or something. There's a big investment that's been put into all of this, and not only the money that they've spent on it, going to retreats and, you know, whatever, books and, you know, there's a big investment. So this spiritual self-image that I have becomes a burden, and it's not sincere. It's really not sincere. It's a bullshit story. I'm sorry to use those terms, but that's the best ones for it. And I'm not saying that the person who asked this question is like this, but it's worth mentioning it because it's a common problem in spiritual circles, self-image. And quite often the guru or the one at the front is a prime example of this spiritual self-image. You know, they play the spiritual person who's holy and all the rest of it. And it's total crap, but people fall for it, you know, they love it, you know. People want an idol, they want somebody to look up to, they want somebody to follow, you know, because it relieves them from the responsibility of making the investigation for themselves. It's easy to be a follower, but what's the point of that? You know, find out for yourself. It's totally within your grasp and your capability to make an investigation and see what is true about any of this stuff. Getting a bit animated there.
There's another one of the long question from no one. Even the couple of times in I tried to pick this short question, but there's tons of questions here. Even the couple of times in meditation, there seemed to be only one, nothing, everything. There seemed an awareness or witness that can take a note of the experience, yet it feels like no other. I don't know what's going on, or am I just constructing something mentally? Or how can you get past this other thing?
Wow. use the word seeming a lot, I think. Yeah, things seem to be, but they're not. You know, seems means something seems to be so, but it's not. If it was so, it would you would know it was so. So, you know, it's the intellect playing games and a narrative. There's a narrative running. You've got to cut the narrative, pause the thinking, sort of empty the mind, just even for a moment. And in that moment, there's a potential of a recognition of naked awareness, naked cognition. There's no sense of I or me or a name or form there. It's just naked awareness. And that's it. That's really it. That is the potent ground of elimination of all the beliefs, all the spiritual beliefs, all the narratives, the stories, and blah blah blah. That's the potent ground of insight, totally available. So there's no point in sort of creating all these stories about I sit and meditate and I do this and I do that, and it's all about me. I do this and I do that. Which is just continuing the story, and it's quite possible if you can actually make a new habit. Habits can be broken, bad habits can be broken, but you can actually create a new habit. And I would suggest a new habit is to pause the thinking as frequently as you can. Just pause the thinking and recognize that naked awareness. Get familiar with that. It's not a scary thing. There's a subtle joy, or I hate to use the word bliss, but there's a bliss. There's a subtle bliss there, where there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. I think Nisargadatta said something once. He said, somebody asked him about, what happened to him, and he said, well, I can't put it in the positive. I can only put it in the negative. And that is to say there's nothing wrong anymore. And, how many people can say that? And why can't you?
I have a question from Alexandra. Alexandra asks, I have a belief that I'm separate from others. How do I investigate that? So I have a belief that I'm separate from others. How do I investigate that?
Well, where did this idea of separation begin? Didn't it begin with the idea of that's not me? When you were a small child, you heard your parents call out your name, and then you get familiar with this word me, and then it's like me. And then you see someone, or that's not me. So there's a sense of separation there, which is a concept. It's a construct, conceptual construction. Now, that doesn't have any, that's not a problem. But when you start to add stories onto it and give it emotional value and dramas and things, it becomes a problem. And it becomes a reference point. And I call it the poor, poor, pitiful me. It's just a story. It's a sense of separation based on ideas or concepts or memories. Memory is the past. The memory, you can't explain this immediate moment that has never happened before. This moment has never happened before. It will never happen again. And it's not based on the past. It's not stored in the memory. It's not in the future. It's not coming from the future. You put all your hopes on the future. I'll be enlightened next week if I do this retreat or if I read this book or whatever. The immediacy right now is the key. And it's ever fresh and new. You get familiar with this quality of ever fresh and new by pausing the thought and recognizing it. And then all of these problems of me and my story and everything, they lose their sting, they lose their seeming value, because they're just psychological suffering. You know, nobody wants to suffer psychologically. But if you make the investigation into the one who is seemingly suffering, you might get a surprise.
Thank you, Gilbert. I have a question from Nina. Nina asks, she says, "Hi, Gilbert Emerson. I've heard many times nothing is happening. Nothing ever happened. Could you talk a little bit about this? And thank you."
Nothing ever happened. And yet here we are talking away about nothing. And I can remember all sorts of things and things that happened. Well, nothing ever happened is really a pointer at the essence of the true nature of things. If you want to use that term, I don't know. Because if you boil it all down, there's a stillness. You can recognize stillness. And this stillness moves, but it doesn't go anywhere. There's a subtle movement, and that movement is called cognition. So the very first instant of consciousness is cognition. And it's right here, right now. It's not in the future. It's not in the past. It's right here, right now. And if you recognize that stillness and the movement are not two. You are the stillness and the movement. So in a way, nothing ever happened, and yet everything is happening. But you can't pinpoint a single event. By the time you try and pinpoint it, it's gone. And you pin another event, which is the pin. It's a bit too scientific, maybe.
Thank you. There's a question here. Thank you for that.
Not that one.
I am must be duality, then, and witnessing assumes a witnesser and a witnessed. So okay. I am must be duality, then must be duality then, and witnessing assumes a witnesser and a witnessed.
Yeah, well, duality is due to the seer and the seen, which is something that Siddhar Rameshwar said. He was Nisargadatta's guru. So there's the activity of seeing, and then the idea of the seer appears. And then the idea of I see appears, which is a story. And then there's the seen, which is the object. So the seer, or the I see, becomes an apparent pseudo subject. And then the seen is the object. And that's duality. But the actuality is the seeing. And I think Bob points this out very well. He says you can't have a seer without the seeing. You can't have the seen without the seeing. So the seeing is primary. It's like the I before the am. The am is the being, the I is the witness of the being. But there's not two, it's not two.
Here's a question from Harvey. Harvey asks, you mentioned pausing a thought, but how do you do that? Also, how do you interpret Ramana Maharshi's self-inquiry of the I?
I can answer the first one. I don't know what I don't know the Ramana Maharshi thing well enough to talk about it. But well, how do you pause a thought? I just did it. You could say there's an intention there to pause the thought. I could explain and say, well, your attention is withdrawn from everything and placed with the naked awareness. And naturally, the thought is paused. It's not a secret. It's not a, everyone can do it, I'm sure. But the thing is that we're so used to following thoughts, you know, you don't need to follow thoughts. Let the thoughts come and go. But if you follow thoughts, it'll take you off into all sorts of, you know, imaginary things and stories. So pausing a thought is really a kind of an intention to pause the thought. And the attention is withheld from everything else. You're just here. And there's no thought. There's clarity. You know, I'm talking, you know, because I have to talk to answer the question. But you can become familiar with that pausing the thought, and it will seemingly get longer. And maybe, you know, you could spend a couple of hours without any thoughts. But it's nothing to be proud of or to, you know, stick a pin on and say, I stopped my thoughts for 2 hours. I'm amazing. I'm on a different level of consciousness now, you know. I think I'll start my own groups. Yes. Sorry.
I have this other question. Oh, okay. What is non-abiding awakening? From Anonymous.
Non-abiding what?
Awakening.
It sounds like something that somebody dreamt up. They stayed up all night and thought of that one. I don't know what it is. What is it? Non-abiding awakening. It just sounds like bullshit. I'm sure there's some guru out there who will explain it to us.
The next one is if there is a constant experience of lack and neediness, this is coming from Lubo and Luciana. If there is a constant experience of lack and neediness, is it possible this intelligence, this mystery, which we all are, to influence them?
You have to read it again, sorry.
If there is a constant experience of lack and neediness, is it possible this intelligence, this mystery, which we all are, to influence them?
Well, I could say yes, and I could say no. It's all based on concepts that, you know, my neediness is I want to add something to make myself complete. But you are already complete. You know, this idea that I need something is erroneous. You don't need it. you know. So, and pausing the thought is what will influence that. You keep pausing the thought as often as you can. I mean, you don't do it all day long, but the thought will arise. Once you feel a benefit from pausing thought, it will come up by itself, and you just pause the thought. Recognize that naked awareness. It's not of any benefit to anyone, to any me. It's not, the me is not interested in this. It's not interested in anything. It doesn't have the capacity to be interested in anything. But it's the structure of the me is vulnerable because it's based on a false premise that I am separate. So, and that's where the neediness comes. I need to protect myself. I need to add this to protect myself from this threat. But it's all based on beliefs and erroneous beliefs, because you're not separate. You've never been separate from the whole. You are the whole. But everything in society, society and education, it's all telling us all this stuff, which is basically based on separateness. And it has its own purpose. It has its own, it has its own purpose in society, but those purposes, or that purpose, is based on an erroneous belief. So it's not really a purpose. It's just the way the thing expresses itself.
Thank you, Gilbert. We have a couple more questions left because we have about 4 minutes left. A couple more questions, and but there's tons of questions here that have not been answered yet. Don't worry, we like making videos, and Gilbert and I will go into another video soon, hopefully, and ask all of these questions, like this one. This one, who or this is from Nizar. Who or what is behind the seeing and experiencing, since there's always something behind that is seeing this, and at the same time, this appears to be completely empty, and yet there is something personal. Want me to repeat that?
No.
You got it?
I know that.
Thank you, Nizar.
I know that. Yeah. Well, the mind, so-called mind, divides everything up. So the whole has never been divided. If I've got an orange, I thought about bringing it over and chopping it in half with a knife, as an example. Once you cut the orange in half, it's no longer an orange. It's two halves of an orange. You can try and put it back together with super glue, but it's not really the orange that it was. Now the whole has never been divided. How could it be divided? It's the whole. It's eternally and infinitely whole. Our capacity of our intellect can't get its head around that, because it's just too vast or too far-reaching or something. So, but the mind divides everything up, and that's fine. I mean, that's what it does. It's part of our survival mechanism, but it doesn't mean it's real. And memory serves a purpose. You wouldn't know how to find your way home if you didn't have memory. But the mind is seemingly doing all these things, and it's a display of consciousness. It's a play of consciousness, and there are all sorts of characters in this play. And when the me is on center stage and thinks it's running the whole show, then there's lots of suffering, and the suffering is unnecessary. Are we almost out of time? Oh, I can't hear you.
We have a minute left, but go ahead. That's okay.
Okay. Yeah. So well, I'll just round off things with basically, nobody can do it for you. You have the capacity to really recognize things in their true nature, which includes, you know, what you are, because they're not separate. But in the scheme of things, as a seeming separate entity or as an individual, one is required to do an investigation, and that investigation has to take place, and you have to be open to recognizing what that means. And I'll round it off there. Thank you very much.